As Grant stood there in the dark, praying, of course, in his heart, he thought to himself, Elder Oswald, as he was leaving on the train, he saw them arresting me at the train station. Certainly, he's going to immediately go, and he'll talk to the mission president, or he'll go to the American embassy. He'll get them to release me. Maybe they'll send a message, like a telegram, saying, hey, you have to let that missionary go. Maybe I can just last that long. He waited. It was an hour or two. His legs were starting to get kind of tired. He was starting to think, maybe I'm going to have to sit down on the ground and just take my chances. When suddenly, the door at the end of the hall opened. The guards came down. They opened up his cell and dragged him back down to the office of the sheriff. And the sheriff was not less drunk than he had been before. No, he was more drunk than he had been before. Sitting in one corner of the sheriff's office was a man who looked like one of the Indians from up in the mountains, nobody that he'd ever met before, and he was sitting there with his hat in his lap, and he was just looking as Grant got dragged in, thrown into a chair, and the sheriff looked at him and said, "You try to come here, tell us you're here to help us live happy lives, but you try to destroy our lives. You know the priests say you destroy our sacred shrines and the images of the virgins and the saints. And also, you come here to say we try to kill you? No. You try to kill us. Jorge, show him your hat." And the man in the corner got up and he came over and he had his hat and he held it out and he gave it to Grant. And Grant looked at the hat. The hat was an old, what they call a campesino hat, kind of like a cowboy hat but made out of felt. And it had a broad cowboy brim around it. And right here in the front of the hat, right at the brim, right where the hat met the brim, it had a hole. And the hole was kind of jagged and rough, and it also had burn marks around the edges. And the sheriff said, "You see, I have the proof. You tried to kill Jorge. Jorge, tell him what happened." And Jorge said, "Hey, senor, I was riding my horse, and then this man, Grant Beans," he wouldn't look at Mr. Beans. He kept his eyes on him. "This man, Grant Beans, he shoot at me from far away, and he shoot at me. The bullet go into the hat and almost kill me." Grant looked at the hat. And something the sheriff didn't know was that Grant was a pretty good observer, and he was good at thinking through problems. And Grant said, "Sheriff, I can give you 3 reasons right now why I did not shoot this man's hat." And the sheriff just looked at him and waited for him to explain. He said, "Number 1, how far away did I shoot you from?" And Jorge, without looking at him, said, "It was about a league, senor." A league was a way of measuring distance in South America at that time. A league is about 3 miles. Grant said, "Yes, not even the best sniper in the world could shoot someone from 3 miles away." Secondly, this hole here is jagged. It's not a perfect circle, and it has scorch marks around it. Obviously, someone just took a hot poker iron out of the fireplace and just burned a hole through the felt hat. And thirdly, it's right at the brim. If he was wearing it when I shot him, he would be dead because it would have gone right into his head. The sheriff looked at him. He reached over, snatched the hat, and he just turned and threw it at Jorge and said some things in Spanish. And Jorge took his hat and he left. The sheriff said, "Fine. You think you're so smart. You go back to jail and you rot in there until you confess to what I say you're doing." And Grant said, "Have you heard anything from La Paz? Maybe from Elder Oswald?" "Oh, I have a message," said Sheriff Vasquez. "It's right here on my desk. It's a telegram from American Embassy. It says, let you go." "Not let you go. What do I care? They can send the army up here to get you. They're not going to come up here. It's too far. You go back to the jail cell." And they took him back to the jail cell. Grant said, "Oh my goodness, he's going to ignore now a message saying from the Americans, let him go? What's it going to take?" Well, thankfully, it was only about another 2 hours of standing in the cell. He never had to lay down on that nasty ground when they dragged him back out again. And when he got into the room, thankfully this time, it wasn't just drunk Sheriff Vasquez, but Elder Oswald was there, looking pretty tired because he had traveled by train all the way to La Paz, and now he had returned, and he was standing there talking to the sheriff. And the sheriff couldn't even stand anymore, and Elder Oswald was just kind of towering over him, saying, if you are going to ignore a direct order, not only from the American embassy, but from the president, to let this man go, then I'm going to have you, sir, arrested. They will send the army up here. They're going to take you away in chains. So you set him free right now, this instant. He's a good man.
He's not a good man. He destroys shrines. He's that person.
He is not a bad person. He's a good person who's here trying to help your people to live happier lives, to be healthy. You let him go right now.
Fine, you're talking too loud. Jay, get them out of here.
And Sheriff Vasquez fell asleep. And the guards took him, tossed him onto the street. And as they went out, one of the guards said, Senor, if we ever find you on the streets of Viacha again, you are going to jail. Sheriff Vasquez ever see you in Viacha, you are going to jail. You go away now. And Elder Oswald said, don't worry, you will never tell Sheriff Vasquez, he will never see Grant Beans on the streets of Viacha again. And Grant said, no, what do you mean by that? Elder Oswald, you don't mean are you going to take us away from here? Are you telling us that we can't continue being missionaries and we have to come back to La Paz? And Elder Vasquez said, no, I meant exactly what I said. Sheriff Vasquez is never going to see you on the streets of Viacha because there are 4 soldiers coming up on the next train to arrest him. So he's going to be leaving. What? Grant was so excited. Wow, that's amazing. This is an answer to prayer. Praise the Lord. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Well, the problem with Sheriff Vasquez was over, but the problem with all the other people up in the mountains who were against the Seventh-day Adventists was not over. Because something had changed. Now all of the Sabbath school members were acting different. They were acting mean, and not maybe mean, but like rude, like not wanting to talk to Grant and Mary. Grant and Mary depended on the other Christians up there who would grow food in the mountains to be able to sell them food for them to eat. They went out to do their grocery shopping, which meant walking from village to village or little hut to little hut to find people who would sell them food, and all the places they would normally go would not open the door. Marco Zantini, even the assistant leader of the Sabbath school, they wouldn't open the door to his house. Pablo, a man who had been coming to Sabbath school, his family wouldn't open the door to their house. And as Grant and Mary walked back home, they said, well, it looks like we're just going to have to tighten our belts and eat a little less right now until we can figure out what's going on. It's kind of sad that these people who come to Sabbath school are like scared of us or something right now. I wonder why that is. As they were walking home, they were about half a mile from home, and near their home was a shrine. A shrine was a place where they would set up an image, some local saint, that they would set up, and then people would pray to this saint when they needed things, maybe come and leave little gifts in front of it. And as they were walking right past the shrine, there was a rustle in the bushes from behind the shrine, and Grant looked back over his shoulder. Stepping out from the bushes behind the shrine was none other than the big man with the bushy mustaches and the hat pulled down low over his head, and the knife not in his belt, but in his hand, Infierno. And we'll find out in 2 seconds what's going to happen because the story's not done yet. And so Infierno looked at them and said, who did this? And they said, what? Nothing happened. What are you talking about? He was pointing at the shrine. He said, this. Who did this? And then he took the knife in his hand, this long knife called a machete, and he swung it at the shrine and chopped the head off of the shrine. And then he pointed at it again and said, who did this? And Grant said, you did this. No. When I tell the story to the people in the towns, I will tell them, you did this. Father Domenico has a plan. Very soon, he and I will get the people drunk. And we will bring them to arrest you in the night, Grant Beans. We'll drag you from your home, tie a rope around your neck, tie the other end of the rope to a horse, and we will gallop it all the way to Viacha. And when we get there, if you are still alive, then we'll put you in the jail cell again. And you know who else will be in that jail cell? You know who else is in that jail cell right now? Because of you. Former Sheriff Vasquez. And he would like to have some special time with you in that cell. We'll come for you. And Infierno turned around and walked into the bushes and disappeared. Grant and Mary knew that they were going to need to do something very important right now. And that was they were going to need to pray. So they did. They went back home, they prayed, they claimed God's promise. That promise that says, I can do all things. Right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That night there was a little tapping on the door. Grant knew it was safe to open the door. A mob probably wouldn't just come and go tap, tap, tap. So he opened the door, and there was Marco Zantini, one of the men who had not opened his door to them that very morning to give them food. He was there with 2 bags of food on his shoulders. He said, "Oh, Senor, I'm so sorry I could not open the door for you when you came this morning. But there is a letter that has gone out, an announcement from Father Domenico. He said that he has the approval of the new sheriff in town, that if any of us help you, if we help provide food for you or do anything to help you, that we will be fined 100 pesos, and we do not have that kind of money, Senor. I am so sorry that we cannot treat you the way that you should be treated. But here, have this food. I know that people will assault you in the daytime, but here, have this food." It was an answer to prayer already, to show that they had not really lost all their friends. But problems started to happen again. Mobs started to show up in the night. Small mobs, not big, huge mobs, but small mobs. They would gather outside after Grant and Mary had fallen asleep, and they would just start yelling and making noise, throwing rocks on the roof. Sometimes they'd come up and pound on the walls of their hut. These huts, they were made out of adobe, and so it was kind of like a dried mud, and it was just held up by some sticks in the ground. And if enough people were to push on it, you could knock these things over. They would start pounding. Enough people would pound that the hut would shake a bit side to side. And Grant and Mary would lay there in bed, and they would just pray, claiming the promises. Other problems started to happen. Members of the Sabbath school started to have problems happening to them too. Their animals would be stolen in the night. Their fences would be knocked down so animals could run away. And even Gregorio Carnaveri got beat up by the mob at one point. Grant Beans decided to go to Viacha to check for his mail one day. As he was riding to Viacha, a group of riders came out from around the mountainside, and they all had pistols and knives on their belt, and they all yelled at him, "Go home! We don't want you here! Go home!" There were many scary occurrences that were happening to Grant and Mary, and they kept claiming those promises. Often they would find themselves humming a little tune that goes like this. Well, Grant got back from checking the mail in Viacha, and he had a letter. And he walked in, and he wasn't looking too happy. He said, "Mary, I have a letter I want you to read." She looked at the letter, and the letter said, it was from Elder Oswald. "We've had a meeting down here in La Paz, and we've decided it's too dangerous for you guys to be up there. We've heard too many reports of just terrible things. We don't want you guys to be killed. We want you to abandon Erpo Chica, move back to Viacha at least, and maybe even move back to La Paz." And they looked at each other, and Grant said, "What do you think?" Mary said, "Well, I have to tell you something that happened while you were gone. It might affect what you think, but it's not going to affect what I think." He said, "What happened?" She said, "While you were gone, Father Domenico and Infierno came with a mob. And the mob had been drinking, and they stood outside the house. And Father Domenico started yelling to the mob, telling them, 'Next week is the feast of San Salvador. And at the feast of San Salvador, we will all come down here, and we will push the hut down. We will kill Grant Beans and his wife, Mary. We are going to stop these devils. We will kill them all, these Protestant heretics, these gringo devils.'" And he went on and on like that for minutes before the mob left. And Mary said, "So Grant, that might make you think that we should do what Elder Oswald said, and that we should just go home, but it doesn't make me change my mind, because you know what? I'm not leaving. We've made it this far. All we've really had has been threats, just people making a lot of noise and doing things to try to scare us." And Grant said, "Well, don't forget, I spent one night in a jail full of poop." She said, "Well, yes, that as well, but really, we've come through it without a scratch. Nothing has really happened to us. We can trust God." So they prayed over it, and they looked at each other after praying, and they said, "You're right. We're going to say no." They wrote a brief letter back to Elder Oswald. "No, thank you for the offer, but we are going to be staying here." And they kept on going through their days, humming that song. Well, 2 days later, the following week, the Feast of San Salvador came and went. And nothing happened. Grant and Mary had been kind of awake most of the night, waiting to see if something would happen, and nothing had happened. The following morning, Pablo, one of the other Sabbath school members who had not been opening his door to them lately, came and he knocked on the door. He said, "Oh, Senor Grant, I am so sorry that I have not been friendly to you. I have not been able to trust God to protect me, but now I trust Him. I'll tell you why. I saw something happen on the day of San Salvador feast." "What happened?" asked Grant. I was over on the other side of the hill watching to see what they would do. That's where they like to gather with the mobs. And they had gathered many people there. Father Domenico and Infierno made a big speech how they were going to come and kill the devils. And Father Domenico was handing out lots of alcohol. And he was drinking maybe more than the people. He would give out 1 cup to the person, and 1 cup for himself, and 1 cup to the next person, and another for himself. He was drinking a lot. And Father Infierno had made the people very angry. They were ready to go and harm you. All of a sudden, Father Domenico, he said, listen. I have something to say to you people. Do not harm the Adventistas. Do not kill the Adventistas or try to stop them in any way. And the people, said Pablo, they didn't know what to think. Infierno, his face was red with rage. Here, Father Domenico had been telling him to get the people ready to kill. And now Father Domenico was saying, do not kill the Adventistas. And the mob said, okay, Father Domenico, we trust you. What you say, we will do what you say. And they all started to leave. Infierno was so angry. He kept yelling, come back. We need to talk more. Father Domenico, he went over. He took another big drink of alcohol from his cup. And he dropped over dead. And the people all turned and saw him laying there dead. And they ran back to their homes. Some of them were saying, God is killing him. God is angry at Father Domenico because he changed the plans. Others said, no. God is angry at Father Domenico because he wanted to hurt the Adventistas. I think, Mr. Beans, it was just that Father Domenico drank too much, don't you think? Grant said, yes. That's true. God doesn't ever want somebody to be hurt and die, but it looks like God used this now to give us a little bit of a break because now nobody's bothering us. And in fact, that stayed true. Nobody bothered them for the next 2 months. So well were things going now that they were finally able to build that school they had a permit for. They dedicated the school. They opened the school, and they were so happy that now that they could claim that promise that we have been conquerors of all things, that through all things you strengthen us, God. And Mary said to Grant, I think maybe we might be done climbing these high mountains, don't you think? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be just peaceful from here on out? Wouldn't it be nice if things were peaceful from there on out? But Grant was not just there to start schools, he was there to help people live healthier lives. And when he found out that in the town nearby, Colana, which was 15 miles away, there was an outbreak of typhus fever. It was an infection that you would get from having lice. The people didn't bathe very often, they didn't wash their clothes often. They would get these little creepy crawly insect things that would bite them, and they would carry this infection that would give them high fevers for days. And they could kill you. They heard that there was an outbreak of typhus in Colana. Grant said, come on, Marco Zantini, let's go, we're going to go help them. And they began riding their horses to Colana. And as they were getting to the outskirts of Colana, riding down the hillside into the town, 6 riders came up the hill towards them. And at the head of the column was a man with big bushy mustaches, and a hat pulled low, and a scowl on his face, and a knife on his belt, and a whip on his belt. And as he rode up closer to them, he spotted them, and he turned and yelled to the other men behind him, that is them. That is the heretic gringo Protestant devils. And they are coming now to our town to spread their heresy. We're not going to let them. And he jumped off of his horse. Grant was only a few feet away still on his horse. And Infierno pulled his whip out. It was a rawhide whip. It was 9 feet long. And when those vaqueros, when the guys who handled cattle would whip them, they could snap off the tail of a cow with one snap. They could get flies off of bushes, off of fence posts. They were that good with these whips, and these whips were so strong. And he looked at Grant, and he uncurled his whip. He coiled back and lashed it out. And now we'll see what happens tomorrow.